Internet. My name is Ayla Tesler-Mabe, and unless you're living under a rock, you've most likely heard of or seen the Peter Jackson documentary Get Back, or at least snippets or advertisements of it all over the internet and social media, and rightfully so. The documentary is an intimate look into Beatles' life towards the end of their amazing career, as well as a look into their songwriting process and how the famous rooftop concert came to be. And one of the most interesting things about this documentary is the title track, Get Back, and how the song started as a social commentary and later evolved into the song that we know and love today. So in this video, I'm going to break down John Lennon's part in the song, including his 2 solos and all of the tasty things that he does in between. Now, to add to its interesting nature, John Lennon actually plays lead guitar on Get Back, which is an interesting departure from most Beatles songs, where of course George Harrison was playing the lead guitar part. So the intro vamps on an A major bar chord for 7 bars, and then you end up playing a turnaround where you play G major, and then D major. And from what I can see when I watch John play it on the rooftop, he plays the first 2 chords as bar chords, and then that D major chord is open. Now, one other very interesting thing that the documentary revealed is that John slapped the strings in the intro of the song and did so to create a crescendo effect going from softer to louder. And when you're playing that A major chord, you kind of just want to focus on the lower strings, or maybe even slap it like this. Getting louder as you go. And then when you get to G major and D major, you can just pick those. Of course, if you put your pick down fully, like I just did, you're probably gonna have a hard time picking up the pick when you need to. So maybe just keep it sort of tucked away, holding it with your thumb and your first finger, and slap with your other available fingers. If you want to actually hear this in action in the song, put some earbuds or AirPods or whatever in, take out the right one, and if you listen only with the left, you will hear John's part, because it is the darker guitar tone that is panned all the way to the left. Now, to get into the verse, we're going to slide into a kind of Delta blues, classic blues riff. Very heavy picking, because that was definitely something that John was known for. And I think this applies to all of his playing in general. It's okay if you sometimes hit strings you don't quite mean to, or things aren't totally consistent, if you want to try to get his personality down as a player, just because that was part of what his style was, which, was kind of cool. And you slide into an A power chord, and then you're going to reach up with your pinky to the 9th fret of the A string, and then you slide up to the 10th fret on the 4 chord, which is D, and you do the same thing. And if you listen to the verse of the song, you'll hear that George is doing the main open chords, and of course John is playing the part that I just described to you. So if you're still not totally sure how to do that Delta blues sort of move, if you count things out as 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, you are going to be playing that pinky up here, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4, just like that. And of course, we're hearing these really subtle in-between notes. Slide up to the 10th fret. And after you do that, we have this classic tasty moment. And so what's going on here is you slide up to the 11th fret of the G string, 10th fret of the B string, and then you bend the 12th fret a little bit more than a whole step. So instead of just bending right to that note, it goes a little sharper, and then you end up grabbing that 12th fret of the high E string, and then you bring them down, 10th fret of the B string, 11th fret of the G string, and then here's something cool I noticed. There's kind of like a flubbed note there, which you can get just by, putting enough pressure on the strings that they don't ring out, but not enough that you're actually playing a fret, and then you kind of get that sort of sound. Kind of fun. And then you come back down to the power chords, Delta blues thing, and same lick again, except it just ends here at the 11th fret of the G string. And something else I wanted to point out, if you want to get some of the John-isms down a little more, it's okay to be a little bit late getting from one chord to the next. And I don't mean, coming in on the wrong beat or like in between, the beats where you should, because then you're just sort of out of time. But it's okay if, you miss the first part of the phrase and it's like you're, coming in, dropping the first few moments of the phrase. Just something that he sometimes does, and I think it's cool to point that out. So now, if we put the whole verse together, this is what we have. So now during the chorus, John has another great lick. Sounds like this. Obviously that wasn't in time, but the first thing I want to show you is this walk up A major pentatonic. You're kind of sliding from around the 5th fret, which is where A is, but it doesn't have to be super exact, but you want to land on the 9th fret of the low E string. Then you play 7, 9 on the A string, and then the 7th fret of the D string. And then you end up playing this cool triad here, which is essentially outlining an A7. And what you're going to be doing is putting your middle finger on that 9th fret of the G string, first finger on the 8th fret of the B string, and then your ring finger on the 9th fret of the high E string. And what you end up playing, when you're strumming it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And obviously you want to keep your strumming hand super loose. You do it 2 times in a row, and then, when the whole song moves to the 4 chord over D, which is a very typical blues thing to have happen, you play slightly different triad shape. I personally am barring with my first finger, just across the 7th fret of the G, B, and E strings. And then I'm putting my middle finger on the 8th fret of the high E string. Though, of course, you could play it, with a variety of different chord shapes. It's whatever you find most comfortable. And then you come back to that A7 sort of sound. And just for the people out there who like theory and stuff like that, this triad shape is outlining a D7, because that's basically where the harmony in the song goes at that point. But long story short, you put that all together and it sounds like this. And then the last time, before we get into the guitar solo, there are no chords played there. And, that would give you time to jump up to the higher part of the neck where the solo takes place. But yeah, last thing I want to say, again, if you pick pretty hard, you might get some of that John Lennon character. But, you do whatever you think sounds good. And when you're ready, let's move on to the solo. So, what we're going to be doing here is sliding up to the B.B. King box, as they call it, or at least I do. And all that means is you're going to slide up to the 11th fret of the G string, sort of from somewhere all the way down here on the neck. And then you play the 10th fret of the B string with that kind of rhythm. And if you can, subtle vibrato on that 10th fret there. And then 12th fret of the B string, and then bend. And then you end up grabbing the 12th fret of the high E string with your pinky. And then you bring that note down. And when you end the phrase, slide off of that 10th fret of the B string. And then we end up playing this cool phrase. Slide from the 7th fret to the 9th fret on the A string, 7 to 9 on the D string, and then you get to the 7th fret of the G string and you want to pull down a little bit. Like that. Adds a little character. And then you end with 5th fret of the G string, 7th fret of the D string. And when you land on that 5th fret of the G string, you slowly bend up, kind of to that major third right there on the 6th fret of the G string. So again, that's the note you're trying to get to. But it's a really slow bend. So you put that first part together, this is what we have. Now next part of the solo. Sliding back up to that 11th fret on the G string. And you're playing the 10th fret of the B string, getting, this kind of that rhythm essentially. And if you can get a few ghost notes in there, those subtle in-between notes. But, the thing with John is it wasn't totally clean or precise. You can kind of hear at some points, he hits some of the other strings around it. So that's okay if you end up doing that. You'll just be that much closer to sounding like John Lennon. And, the staccato-ness of that doesn't have to be super tight either. You can kind of keep things loose and cool. It's about vibe more than anything. You end up repeating the first part of the solo again. And when I just played it, I kind of overbent the note. But actually, thinking about it, I think he underbends the note a little bit. You can hear that's a little flat. Phrase ends the same way. And the solo almost ends exactly the same, except we have this little lick that's thrown in. And you're here at the 7th fret of the B string. You bend up like a half step. But again, it doesn't have to be super precise. In fact, if it's a little sharp or a little flat, that might be a little bit more authentic to the song. And then you play 5th fret of the B string, 7th fret of the D string, 5th fret of the G string, and then you move to the 7th fret of the G string, do the same sort of thing, bend up, and then you play this back and forth between the 5th fret of the G string and the 7th fret of the D string. And that's the end of the first solo. So this is what it sounds like when you put all of that together. So when you go back into the next chorus, the second chorus, you play these Delta blues chords again. Move to D, back to A. Feel free to hear the slide in between all of the chords. And there's some shots that happen at the end of the chorus. You may have noticed that the second time through that progression, I actually stayed on A the whole time. I didn't move to D at all until there are these shots that I think you just end up playing, C here at the 8th fret of the E string, and then D here at the 10th fret of the E string. It's a little unclear. It's actually kind of hard to hear what's going on exactly at that point, but that would align you with what the rest of the band is doing. And of course, there's that lovely break that leads us into Billy Preston's solo, which is probably my favorite part of the song. During Billy Preston's solo, again, more of the same. Delta blues on A to D, and then we go into that chorus lick again. And that's what you would do if you want to vamp under the keys solo. And that leads us back to the second verse, which is essentially the same as the first verse, but slightly different licks in between. So the first lick is actually exactly the same as the first verse, even with that kind of flubbed muted note at the end there, which is funny. But the second time, we do get a slightly different lick. Except it's actually not a new lick, it's the one that ended the first solo. So you already know that, which is great. So if you put that all together, this is what the second verse sounds like. So there's not much to mention in this next chorus. It's pretty much exactly the same as the first one. The only thing that's worth mentioning, at the very end of the chorus, leading us into the second solo, there is that chord at the end of that major pentatonic lick. So there isn't that break that there was, in the first chorus. Just wanted to point that out. Let's talk about the second solo. So the first part of the second solo sounds like this. So what's happening here? We slide up to that 11th fret of the G string, and you end up playing the 10th fret of the B string, getting that kind of rhythm. And then you play the 12th fret of the B string twice. And this time I think that bend is a little bit sharp. Catch the 12th fret of the high E string, bring them down, ending the same way as usual. That nice slide off of the 10th fret of the B string. Pardon me. And all of this stuff is stuff that we've discussed before in this lesson. And lots of little moments where the strings are kind of being tugged down as he plays them. And so they're all a little bit out of tune, like in a cool way. Like that's a classic blues thing to do. But, let's say I don't do that. Sounds like that. But if I add those little character bends in there, this is what it sounds like. So, bend, kind of on any note that I'm landing on with my index finger in particular. I'm kind of just pulling down as I go. And then it ends with, which is essentially the same lick that we've looked at before in the song, but you want to pull down again on that 5th fret on the G string, and then actually come up to the 7th fret, which is, one extra note than what we've done so far. So that's the first part of the second solo. Let's look at the next half. So, to break down what's going on there, again, sliding into that 11th fret. And we have a different variation on the rhythm here, coming up to the 10th fret of the B string. And then you actually, I think, hammer on to the 12th fret of the B string. And then you pick it after. And the reason I think that is just because that first 12th fret on the B string seems pretty gentle. So I'm inclined to believe that he hammered on there instead of actually picking it twice. And again, you bend, slightly sharp if you can. And then you catch the 12th fret of the high E string when you bend again. bring it down. And then you play the 12th fret of the B string and land on the 10th fret. And when you're on that 12th fret, of course, there's a bend. And it's one of those bends where, you bend the string up, but you don't actually hear it come down. It's not like that. It's 1, 2, 3, 4. And again, the timing. And we end with this phrase. Moving between the 10th fret of the B string and the 11th fret of the G string. And then ending the whole phrase on the 12th fret of the B string. And it sounds like he kind of cuts that last note pretty short because, he's immediately coming back down to this part of the neck for the chorus. So if you find that you are cutting notes short so that you can move to other parts of the neck more quickly, which is sometimes something you want to avoid as you become a more clean technical guitar player, if you seek to become that. Don't worry about it with the song. It's okay if you and sort of cut notes short. So now to play the second solo in its totality, this is what it sounds like. And then the second solo is followed by the final chorus of the song, which is, same stuff you've heard before in the song, nothing new. And only thing to take note of, at the very end of the chorus, you actually will end up ending on this D7 triad, because, you'll hear when you listen to the song, it sort of stops before the whole 2 times through the progression is through. And just try your best to lock in with the band because, the song ends kind of suddenly. So I hope you have enjoyed this lesson as much as I've enjoyed showing you how to be John in Get Back. And if you haven't seen the Peter Jackson documentary, I highly recommend it as it's an incredible insight into Beatles' life towards the end of their career as a band, how they wrote songs on the fly in the studio, and the story that led up to the infamous rooftop concert where they played Get Back multiple times. So please let me know if you've seen the documentary and which moment was your favorite, or what your favorite Beatles song is, if you can actually pick one. Let's just basically discuss the Beatles in the comments. Anyways, I'll see you soon.